Welcome everyone to this complete beginner whittling lesson. In this lesson we are going to talk about how to whittle one of these cute simple little goldfish in 15 minutes or less. And I do believe that's very achievable for this, possibly even less. We're going to do that out of a 1 by 1 by 2 piece of basswood right here. And if you're not familiar with the series, I'm calling these beginner lessons, not tutorials, because I'm going to give you some learning goals for our lesson today. And our goals for this lesson are that you'll be able to use multiple cuts to carve smooth surfaces and to cut against the grain. And the difference between this and other tutorials is I'll take time to pause and kind of explain those concepts as we go through if you're not familiar with the series. So our goal today is going to be to whittle a fish like this. Simple, cute, smooth surfaces easily with just one knife. Okay. Knife I'm going to use today is a 1 3/4 inch deep holler knife. Absolutely beautiful. I love this knife. Got this recently from Deep Holler, and I can't recommend it enough. And you'll notice that the knife is almost as big as the block here. Well, sometimes when carving something little like this, and especially when I want these nice, clean, big facets, I find it easier to use a bigger knife. So you could certainly accomplish this project with a smaller knife, and that would be fine. But I like to use a bigger, rough out size knife if I'm carving something small like this. So let's start with the pattern. I've marked 3 of the sides already. I'll mark the 4th side, and what I'm going to do on each side is I'm going to put a center line down the middle, okay? And then I said that this is 2 inches long, so I'm putting horizontal lines every 1/2 inch. So I've got a horizontal line basically down the middle, and then 1/4 of the way down on either side, breaking that whole block up into 4ths. And so I'll go ahead and draw some pattern lines on here. What we're going to do is carve the fish on the corner, or on the across the diagonal of that, to make it as tall as possible. So if I start on the back here, I'm going to draw a little triangle like that and like that. I'll do the same thing down here, like that, and like that. To make it clear, I'll just shade that in. We're going to remove that. We're going to remove that. Let's do the same thing on the other 2 sides here, like that. It's going to give me, whoops, down here, sorry. It's going to give me the shape of the tail on both sides, there and there. And then on the front, I'm going to carve down here and here. You can shade that in if we want, so you can kind of see the profile of the fish, how that's going to turn out there. And the same thing on this side, like that, and like that. Now, in addition to that, what I'm going to do is flip it around, and we'll use these lines later, but I prefer to just get all my pencil work done up front and put a line down the center there, running vertically, as the fish shape is going to be vertical, and then the same on the back, just like that. All right, that gives us a sense of the profile of the shape that we're going to get. So first thing that we're going to do is take these hard corners off. You can see the shape is flat on the front and on the back, of course. I'm going to cut this corner off all the way down to these halfway lines on both sides. I'm going to use that using simple push cuts, which we learned in earlier lessons. And I'm just going to work my way across until I can get that mostly flat from one side. I'm looking to get it completely flat down to the center line I drew on this side and that side. And what I usually do is get there at the bottom like that and then flip it around, and I can take some large chunks off. So you can see where having a larger knife is easier for this. If you have a smaller knife, that's totally fine. You could do this with a shorter knife. You just take a few more cuts to do it. And I'm going to do that until that side is basically completely flat. Okay, so you can see that we did that. Do the same thing on this side. When you look at that shape of the fish, you might think, well, start with a thinner board and cut the shape of the fish out of that. And you certainly could. I think it's kind of fun to take a square block like this, a 1x1 square block, and just change it into a different shape. There's something kind of satisfying about that. So yeah, I'm flattening it out and taking a whole lot of wood off here in this first step. Flattening it out. But it's also just kind of cool to take a square block and turn it into something like that. Alright, so now I've got the sides of the fish carved off. And I've already got marked well with my pencil marks where I'm going to carve off next. So let's start with the head up here. And I'm just going to take this corner off, and if it's helpful, you could even connect these lines here just to see visually what I'm doing here. So this is the front of the fish. I marked those triangles there, and I'm just going to take them off like this. A few cuts along the side until I've removed that triangle from the side. Same thing on the other side. A few cuts along the side until I've got that flat. Okay, starting to get the front profile of that fish shape going. And then on the back half, I've got these double triangles here I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to do that with a V cut. I'm going to put a stop cut straight down the middle of that first. I'm going to make a V cut into it. Okay. Now I've got to make a really big V cut here, so I'm going to take several cuts to do this. But I want to keep it even, and so I'm just going to keep extending that stop cut down the middle to make sure that each way I come down, that I'm always breaking off in the middle right here where I want to. So putting that stop cut down in the middle of that valley is really helpful there. And for the last cut here, I might turn it around so I can get a little more leverage on it until I get that out. Perfect. Okay, so there's the top one. And I'll do the same thing on the bottom. Okay. And if you take more cuts to get there than this, that's fine. It'll take some practice, and you can do as many cuts as you want. If you've got a smaller knife that won't cross that entire thing well, entire surface well, this is one of the learning goals for today, was how do you make these flat surfaces. So I could do that by going here at an angle if I needed to, and I could do an angle kind of here, but that's not flat. So it helps get me there down to that line, right? But if I really want a flat facet, this is one of the things I want to talk about today. If I really want that flat facet, I can come back to it after I'm done. I can make one clean cut at the end. Okay. So you might look at, something like this with these really cool, I think cool, flat facets and think, well, those are just, single cuts, but they're not, most of them. They're multiple cuts, but then at the end I kind of come back, and when I finish that step, I make sure that I carve them down to flat facets. And we'll see that in here with the next step as well. So the next thing I want to do, I've got the basic side shape profile here, but I'm going to have to bring on the front and the back. And so let's start with the head. There's a reason that I'm starting with the head, and that is because when I'm holding the head, I'm squeezing the tail. And I can show you that what's happened to me a couple times as I was working this pattern out is that I I broke off the corner of a tail. So if I'm holding this down here after it's all carved and I'm holding it tight while I'm carving the front, these tails down here have a tendency to break. So you want to be careful of that. Carve the head first, so when I'm carving the tail, it's out in the open and I don't have to squeeze it tight when I'm carving the head. So I extended that center line down the sides just so you could see that. And I'm going to start shaping the front of the head a little bit more here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start, what I want to get is a clean flat cut that's going to go from this line here along that center edge and across the middle here. And so you can kind of see it if I were to draw it in. Let's see, we can kind of follow that line there. And this is how that's going to look. I'm going to keep carving smaller cuts along the edges until I can make a nice flat cut just like that. Okay? And you can see that goes right along that center line I drew and along this line here. And I've got a really nice, clean, flat surface. Okay? So let's do it on the other side. And again, that's one of the goals for today, is to say you don't have to do this in one cut, even if you have a rough out knife. You can do this in a few cuts. Just gradually go on until I get that. Okay? Same thing on the other side. I'll draw those triangles on because it may be helpful for you to see them as a guide. Just like that. And let's follow that down. Okay, great. Now I've got a boxy front, but I've got those nice facets that I want down there. I've got this center line here. So the last step I'm going to take, or the next step I'm going to take to shape the head, is I want to carve down from this line up to where the tip of the nose, or the front of the face, is going to be. Okay, now again, it's going to start from back here. It's going to go all the way up to this center line, but I'm going to start by doing that smaller in shorter chunks until I get up to there. Okay, and that center line's right there. I really do want to get all the way up there, so I'm just going to push through that a little bit more until I'm right up to the middle. Okay, and then I can look at these facets and I can kind of see how they're looking. I might decide I want to make that one a little bit more like that, so I can get some nice symmetric flat facets there. I can just do a really light push cut, shaving off the corners of those if I want to finish that off. So let's do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to taper this down all the way back to that quarter line up to the middle, and I want to get this almost flat. We can take the last edge off on our own. So again, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to think about, are my facets symmetric here? I'm going to do this one a little bit more just like that, and this one a little bit more just like that. Okay. Now, that's pretty close to done. I'm going to do a couple things here. First, I'm going to come up at the top, and I'm just going to do a simple cut just a little bit in there to shave that off. It's going to give a little bit of a flat edge to the top and bottom of the face, going into where the mouth would be. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of do a flat cut straight across the top. Now that's cutting straight across the grain, so be careful with that, but that'll just take that straight off. And there we go. That's the front of the fish done. All right, we're going to do some similar things on the back end here. You remember we've got our center line drawn here down the length of the middle of the tail. And similarly, I'm going to do cuts here like I did at the front. So I'm going to take off the corner here. I want this facet to run from this corner here up to there. I'm just going to push my knife along that until it gets up to that center corner there. Same thing here. Multiple cuts, and then I get to this nice flat surface like that. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that on the other side. I'll mark the triangle again so we can see that. Just like that. And multiple push cuts, just sliding through, skimming off the top layer of wood to make those nice flat surfaces. All right, so we've got that kind of tapered shape down there, but now, like the front, I'm gonna have to carve from here, this quarter-inch line here up to, or the quarter of the thing, about a half-inch down from the bottom of the tail up to this midline. And this is probably the hardest line to cut on this project. So it's because it's really wide front to back. And so I want to get that line down to the bottom here, right to that line here, but you can see I've still got a long ways to go. So this is another place where I'm going to take multiple cuts. I'm going to cut to the side here, and that's helping me get progress towards that center line until I get down across the middle. And I'm going to keep working that down. This is a little bit challenging because you're really cutting across the grain here. Not against the grain yet, that'll be another step here in a few minutes, but definitely cutting across the grain. So you want a nice sharp knife, you want a strong knife for this. And again, that's why I would use a roughing knife here. You want something long and with a little bit of a sturdier blade in order to make some of these cuts. So we'll repeat the process on the other side of the tail here, cutting down. And as I get up to the sides there, it's going to be easier for me to make some multiple cuts across here until I can come back across the middle. But eventually working out to getting those smooth, flat surface across the tail there. That's pretty good. I'm almost flat there. I'm just going to work that down a little bit more. Okay, and again, the only thing you got to really be careful on this carving is these tips of the tails. You could break them off if you're not too careful here. I actually made this one a little thinner than I probably would have preferred, but as long as I don't push on it, it should be okay. All right, the next thing we're going to do to shape the tail is we're going to add this little pinch in that you see here from the tail to the body, this right here. Okay, and I can draw that in as well by drawing a little triangle here from the center, there at the tail, down to the side here. And this is going to be kind of a V-cut on an angle, so I'm going to put my stop cut right in there where the tail meets the body. I'm going to cut up to it, I'm going to cut down to it. Okay. And so I've got that stop cut right along the edge of the tail, but I want to get ultimately a facet that's coming all the way down here at the end of the body and all the way up here to the top of the tail, down into that. Okay. I'm using a pole cut or a paring cut from the top down to get to that. Okay, if it's easier for you, you could turn it around and you could use a push cut here, but watch the corner if you do that. Okay, so that's pretty good. Just want to make sure I've got a clean cut in there, and then again run over my surfaces to make sure I've got clean flat facets. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to do this kind of awkward V-cut in the corner here. Start small, keep that stop cut there so I stay right along that line where I want it, and then I'm going to come along that corner of the tail, up the side of the body until they meet pretty much right in the center of the tail. Perfect. Okay. All right, let's do that on the other side quickly. Same thing. And take some bigger cuts here because I can. Until we get it there. All right. So that's pretty good. Bring that across the center just a little bit more. So it's pretty much meeting or just close to meeting in the middle. Great. So now we just have one last step to finish, which is going to be the notch in the back of the tail right here. So this was the second learning goal for this, which is going to be carving against the grain. So let me mark the center of the tip of the tail here, right like that. Okay, and then I'm going to mark a quarter on each side, or halfway between the middle and the end on each side. Then I'm going to put a little dot kind of halfway between there and the bottom, and I'm going to draw that up to those there. And this is just, defining the shape of the notch I'm going to cut out of the tail. Same thing here, about halfway down and out to those. And of course this area in here is what we're going to get rid of. Now, this tricky part. We've talked before about carving with the grain. And so if I was going to carve along a slope like this, I would carve I'd want to carve like this, because the grain is running vertically straight up and down like this. It's going to be easier for me to carve across here than this way. It's going to get caught and go down in. Now, I'm going to tell you to do the opposite back here, because you have to. So I'm going to put a stop cut right down the middle of the tail. You're going to notice that your knife goes straight in there because you're going straight into the end grain. And then I'm going to make a V-cut right into that like I have before. The difference is that you're making a V-cut in the opposite direction. Normally you would want to be carving this up and out, but you can't in order to make this cut. So you're cutting it down and in. So in one of the earlier lessons we talked about, carving with the grain. Well, there's exceptions to that, and this is one of them, where you have to carve against the grain. And notice that my knife can do it. My knife can carve against the grain when I want it to. I can kind of feel it getting pulled down in there, but I can control it. I can make those cuts. The reason I can is because my knife is sharp and my knife is strong. So a recommendation that I might make, which I didn't do here, but I might make, is before you make these cuts, take a minute to stop and strop, especially if you're not sure if your knife is completely sharp. I know mine was before I started, so I'm not too worried about it. When you're done with it, you put some stress on that. You might want to take a break and stop and strop when you're done with it. This is very similar if you've ever done a Moravian star like this. Some of these corners you have to do against the grain like that. And so that is a new skill for this lesson. So you can see you can do it. It's not too difficult. And if you have a sharp, sturdy knife, you'll do it. A lighter detail blade might struggle with that because it's just not strong enough to push against. And a knife that's not sharp will definitely struggle with it. But that's it. We did the whole fish. There we go. Now, my goal with this is really just to give you a basic shape, right? So that's easily done in, 15 minutes. You can make a ton of these and then have fun customizing them. You can put different shapes on them and stuff. I played around with notching different things. You could try to carve, little lips like that, or eyes or gills, fins. You can have fun with that. You could also play around with different sizes. So this is just a 1x1x3, right? And I changed the proportions of where I'm coming down to make the nose a little bit pointier. I love this little shape from the 1x1x2. It just looks like a goldfish from the goldfish snack crackers. But I will show you before we wrap up. So there's your basic shape. You can whittle that easily in 15 minutes or less. But I will show you real quick before we wrap up a little bonus here, which is how I added these little scales or gills on the side here. I don't know if they're scales or gills or a fin, but they just look cute. So the way I do this is I paint the fish first. And so I've got one on the right here, this blue one that I've painted, but I haven't carved yet. So I paint it first, watered down acrylic paints, and then I cut these little shapes out, and that leaves the exposed wood under there, which is just a nice effect, I think. And so let me show you how I did that. Now, this is obviously optional. You could paint this, you could wood burn it, you could do whatever you wanted to, but this is just a nice little flourish, so I'll show you how I did it. I'm going to use a 4mm U-tool, U-gouge. This is from Dockyard. If you have a similar U-gouge, and a U-gouge would be also called a veiner sometimes. The difference here is that it is it's a U shape. It comes all the way up the sides to make a complete U. Okay, so if you have one that's slightly different size or whatever, that's fine. The 4mm seems to be a good size to go across here so that I can fit 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a stop cut. I'm putting this straight vertically into the wood to create a stop cut that's the shape of that U. And the key to doing this is to be decisive. Get it where you want, and then make a really hard stop cut. Push it in there. I can wiggle it a little bit, but I don't want it to skip around or I'll make unwanted lines there. So you can see that right there. I'm going to do another one to the right of it. And I'm going to do another one to the left of it. So just pushing straight in, making those. Those are going to serve as little stop cuts, but they could actually serve as, by themselves, nice little shapes that you could do. All right. So next thing is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to come right below that, and I'm just going to push the gouge in straight up to that like a stop cut, and that little chip's going to pop out, and I'm going to get that cute little scale shape. I'll do the same thing on the other two. Okay, so there's all 3. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, a couple things. You might take more than one cut to make it work. That's fine. Don't rip, don't pull. You'll mess the paint up. Just repeat your cuts. Get your gouge in the same spot. Repeat your stop cut if it's not coming out. Repeat your little push cut into that in order to get it out cleanly. Resist the urge to pull or to scrape. The other thing I would suggest is if you haven't done anything like this before, get a little flat piece of scrap wood, throw some paint on it. Well, maybe not throw it, but brush some paint on it, let it dry, and then practice this on there before you do it on something that you've carved. But the great thing about these is that they're so short and easy that they can be, just like the Happy Wood Spirit guys, they can be something that you practice different finishes on. So there you go. Simple little accent element. The other thing I added to these was just a little happy eye. Paint that with a toothpick dipped in black paint, and just draw that little eye on, and that's it. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun with these fish. Make your own variations of them. Customize them however you want, and have fun. Happy whittling.